What's up, Miami Dolphins fans? How are we doing today? It is Ben Morgan of the Fins Up Network. The rare Wednesday afternoon preview and prediction game, with obviously being early this week on Thursday, which always kind of stinks. A couple of good things playing on Thursday this early in the season, though. It's a home game, so we don't have to do the early traveling. And then if you look ahead into our next game, obviously we don't want to look too far ahead. We're going to have our hands full with a divisional rival in about Bills. But if you look ahead to week 3, it's one of our 2 West Coast trips where we have to fly all the way out to Seattle. So at least making that West Coast trip, we get a little bit of extra time to prepare for that Wednesday trip. But this is the final preview and prediction video for our week 2 Thursday night game against the Buffalo Bills. If you missed yesterday's video, we talked some top keys to victory, both offensively and defensively, for this game against the Bills. Today, we're going to take a dive into the final injury report. I'm going to talk about the top things that I've got my eye on. Heading into Thursday night, we're going to tackle the viewer questions that were submitted. Thanks, as always, to those that took the time to get a question submitted as well. Before we jump into all of that, though, I got to hear from you. Let's hear your final score predictions. Hey, last week we crushed it. We had a bunch of Dolphins victories. We got a lot of wins that way. We didn't have anyone with an exact score prediction. I don't care. It's for fun. The actual score prediction is for fun, but let's load the comment section up with a bunch of Dolphins victories, because there's actually been a couple of Bills fans that have been creeping in the comments from the previous video as well. So we got to make sure we're outdoing them by quite a bit. This is a Miami Dolphins YouTube channel for what it's worth. I did get some feedback that the injury report I've been popping up, the text is just too small. Thank you for that type of feedback. I ended up putting it on the scroll as you can see it going below. So we'll change it up moving forward. We will do it this way unless I find a different way to do it. I thought I blew it up enough. I definitely did not. But as you'll see from that injury report, as we already essentially assumed with Raheem Mostert, he is out. And then just like last week, Malik Washington is out as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Unfortunately, I can't go into too many details as to what the true deal is with Raheem Mostert right now. Just that definitely out for Thursday night, and there's a chance that it could be longer than that. So we'll keep an eye on that moving forward. De'Von Achane and Elijah Campbell are noted as questionable. We're going to chat a little bit more about Achane as well. The new injury today, though, was Elijah Campbell, who got in a limited practice session because of an Achilles injury. Now, Campbell didn't get any defensive snaps last week against the Jags. He did see 17 snaps on special teams. So obviously a little bit of a loss in that department if he cannot go. Like I said, he is listed as questionable. He's also one of those guys that's kind of a candidate for any time the Miami Dolphins want to trot out 3 safeties, which we didn't see quite as much as I expected last week against the Jaguars, but that leaves Marcus May now, who kind of was that guy in those situations, as being the Dolphins option in that role. From the Bills perspective, we talked a little bit about Taron Johnson already being ruled out. We're actually going to chat more about that here in the viewer submitted questions that came in as well. But a couple of things before we get those that I'm going to have my eye on in this Thursday night action against the Bills. And one of the first things is the guy that just looked 100% healthy, ready to go, spry, electric. Any word that you want to use to describe Jaylen Phillips that's a positive word basically fits what he was able to do last week coming off that Achilles injury from last season. But will this short rest, obviously it's not the longest week. He had all the time in the world to prepare for that game against the Jaguars, and now he only had a handful of days truly to prepare for the Buffalo Bills. He ended up playing 34 of 53 defensive snaps last week. That comes in at 64% of the team snaps. Quite honestly, higher than I anticipated. Hearing that he was going to be on a snap count, I sort of figured he'd be in that 45% snap range. So he's already playing a little bit more than I thought. But once again, that's just my opinion. But like I said last week, coming back from that injury, looking better than I anticipated him looking, getting a sack, looking explosive, looking powerful. Is he going to be that when he's getting this short of rest? So that's definitely something I'm going to have my eye on, especially against a mobile quarterback, a big physical presence quarterback like Josh Allen. Next thing I'm going to be looking for Can our Miami Dolphins offense, are they sustaining drives? Are they keeping drives going on a regular basis? Are we scoring at on a regular basis? Last week we punted or have a turnover on downs on 6 out of our 11 offensive drives. If you look back to last year when this offense was clicking, high flying, we did some recaps where we're saying, you remember the Dolphins punting today? They only had a couple of punts within the first few weeks. There was games where, hell, I think they punted like no times or maybe 1 or 2 times. That's when the offense was clicking. I want to see more scoring drives, less punts, more sustained drives. One of the biggest things, too, when you're playing a quarterback like Josh Allen and a Buffalo Bills team that maybe they're not on paper as potent offensively as they were in years past, you still want to limit the amount of times that this guy is touching the ball. So making the most of your drives, sustaining drives, keeping the chains moving, showing a little bit of evolution in that offense, because quite honestly, we're so used to at certain points in times just hitting that big play and scoring. That's great. That's putting points on the board. There's no issues with that, but it does do a little bit of number on the defense. You got to give them some rest as well. So sustain drives, trying to get points out of them at the same point in time. All right, so we said we'd talk a little bit more about Raheem Mostert. So obviously he is out. De'Von Achane listed as questionable. I was told De'Von Achane feels pretty damn good as of Wednesday. So we'll see what the coaching staff ends up doing. I think if I was making a call on it, I think Achane is going to be able to give it a go. We'll see, and we'll find out for sure tomorrow. Regardless, with Mostert out, I don't think we're going to see Jalen Wright being a healthy scratch once again. Look for him to make his debut, and if he does, what does it look like? Is he getting meaningful carries? Does it end up being Jeff Wilson? Does it look like Jalen Wright from the preseason where you watched him and said, we can't keep this guy off the field if he's healthy and if he's contributing and if he gets and understands the offense, if he knows his assignment? That's a lot of things as fans that we just don't necessarily see or understand because we don't know what his assignment is every single play. But man, when he got the ball in his hands, fast, elusive, the speed, the hitting the hole with conviction, he was doing it all. I am excited to see this guy if indeed he gets to make his debut on Thursday, which I'm kind of assuming we will see. Let's jump into the questions. As always, thanks to all of those who submitted questions. Actually, for having a short week, we got quite a few submitted, so I actually kind of combined a couple of the questions that were fairly similar. If I missed any, I'll go back through as well. I'll hit you up in the comments in the video. I did combine this first one. Chris came in with, how do we stop Josh Allen from tearing up the Fins every time? And then Zonka Would Run said, we need a spy for Josh Allen who won't fall for his stupid pump fake. Who would be the best spy? I absolutely love that as well, because if you've watched Josh Allen play football before, but he does this little fake. You know he's not going to throw it, but just doing that fake alone gets defenders to leave their feet every single time, and it gets him, Josh Allen, to where he wants to go. So quite honestly, kind of to answer these questions in a bit of an order, it's the adage, you rush with discipline. You can't just come flying off the edge and create a gap for him to run. You also need to be mindful of the times when it's likely for Josh Allen to run versus the time it's to pass. We talked about that more in the last video. Like I said, go back and check that out if you haven't seen it yet. But when it's a crucial down and distance, if it's a goal-to-goal situation, that's when Josh Allen has been kind of proven, based on last week anyways, to be more likely to run. And like we said in that video, he'll run whenever he wants. He's Josh Allen. He's athletic. He's going to be able to do that. But rushing with discipline, knowing when he may take off and run, and then just in general, being able to wrap up when you do have him. So often, this guy is so big, he can break that tackle. He can get those extra couple of yards. You got to wrap him up when you get him. And then speaking onto the spy role, when we drafted Channing Tindall, like, if all else fails, this guy can blitz and he can be a quarterback spy. And I still think he could do that at some capacity, but I don't think we saw him be a healthy scratch last week. I don't think we're going to have him just for the sake of potentially being a spy for Josh Allen. So I think we need to look elsewhere. I've been told that the Dolphins have been practicing with potential spy in these situations, maybe being a safety. You got a Jordan Poyer who has played with Josh Allen, knows a lot about Josh Allen the last few years in Buffalo. Look for him potentially to do that. Look for Marcus May to potentially do that. We talked about Elijah Campbell being questionable. Look for potentially one of those safeties. And it might not be a situation where we're doing it every single play, but when opportunities arise where we think maybe he's going to take off and run, those strategic moments, maybe it's one of those safeties. So keep an eye on that. Kangaroo Bob comes in. Our interior offensive line, massive concern. Can we improve it or do we have to live with it? It's funny because Pro Football Focus grades come out like whatever, Monday, Tuesday after the week. They had the Dolphins graded as an offensive line unit as one of the top 5 units of all NFL offensive lines from week 1. And to that, I'll say there were some positives, but at the same time, I think that's more of a pat on the back to Tua than it is the offensive line. We talked about how many throws were thrown at or just beyond or just behind the line of scrimmage. And when you're blocking for those, you're going to win your matchups more often than not. You're not really having to keep your guy at bay all that long. So that's a little bit of a side rant, but regardless, in regards to our current interior offensive line, at this point, I think we're going to live with what we've got. Maybe you see something before the trade deadline, and we made a deal a couple of years back for a guy like Bradley Chubb before the deadline. I get that. But quite honestly, even trade deadline deals are fairly rare. So I wouldn't hold my breath on trying to get someone else. I wouldn't mind an extra body coming in, but the fact that we've already been into week 1, entering week 2, we haven't made any changes. I think that we're going to end up living with what we got. If anyone disagrees, by all means, put that in the comments as well. This one was also a duplication. I combined a couple here. Is our passing attack going to take off considering the Bills secondary isn't as stout as it once was with Hyde, Poyer, Tre'Davious White, etc.? That's from SHT017. Every time I see that, I just think shit 017, but we're missing an I, obviously. And then Dean came in with Taron Johnson's out for the game. Who do you think will benefit the most by being defended by his backup? I would say that a couple of reasons why the passing game maybe will take off in week 2. I mean, we threw for over 300 yards in week 1. I know it didn't necessarily look all that sexy, that efficient. We had the big play to Tyreek. We had the big play to Waddle. We had a couple other plays sprinkled in as well. But where it could take off, it could become more consistent is because, well, Raheem Mostert is out. That's the top running back that you're relying on for those carries. And it's not like Achane or Wright can't do it, but we saw last week, Achane was even super active, 7 targets in the passing game. So that's kind of like a new way that the Dolphins want to go with De'Von Achane. But then also it's exactly what you said. They don't have a lot of the pieces that they recently had. This isn't that Bills secondary that, quite honestly, I used to be pretty scared of when it was Poyer, Hyde, Tre'Davious White. It's like, man, you've got a top 5 cornerback in the league. You got the best safety pairing in the league. Mind you, this was 1 to 3 years ago when all those guys were more so in their primes. I know injury and age has kind of caught up to a lot of those guys, but this definitely isn't the Bills secondary of those years. And then if you look at maybe who benefits by Taron Johnson being out, well, Johnson is one of the better slot corners in the league. So quite honestly, it's not like he's the guy that's going to be following guys regardless of where they go. So I think it's going to be whoever gets lined up in the slot, where in my opinion, that's advantage Miami. Because if it's just your typical Braxton Berrios, that's fine. That's great, whatever. But we've seen Tyreek Hill line up in the slot. We see Jalen Waddle line up in the slot. De'Von Achane maybe can play a role like that as well. I think our wide receivers at this point are interchangeable enough. That's what Wes Welker and Mike McDaniel want from these guys. That's where Eric Ezukanma's had so many issues in the past. It's like they trust him to play one position, but if they asked him to move around, do they trust him? There's always been a little bit of trust issues with that. So the nice thing is the wide receivers that we roll out, they're interchangeable. You can move them into different positions. So quite honestly, it's who's going to ever end up being in that slot. It might not just be one guy. Darren comes in with, do you believe the offense we saw last Sunday was our new offense, or do you believe they will unveil a new offense this week? Quite honestly, we talk about evolution of offense. We talk about incorporating Achane in the passing game, Jonnu Smith. I think all that stuff is still, we're in a process of that. It's only been 1 week. But quite honestly, even going back to last year with Mike McDaniel, he is so week to week with his play calling, with the schemes, what he's trying to set out to do. Last year, we saw spurts of mid-range to deep passes. We saw spurts of screen passes. We saw game plans that were a little bit more run heavy. It's all over the board. It's almost like once he thinks a defensive coordinator is maybe up to him, he's going to change it up for another week, for another couple of weeks. So I think that kind of remains the same this year, where maybe it's not like a new offense. It's just a continually evolving offense, which is what you want. You don't want defensive coordinators knowing exactly what's coming every single play that we're running against them. And quite honestly, being the Buffalo Bills, Mike McDaniel has certain games kind of marked on his calendar, and you can bet that the Buffalo Bills are one of them. So some of these new plays and new offense, however you want to word it, you know that he saved some stuff up for this game against Buffalo. So I don't know whether it's a trick play, something that he's had in his bag that he's been holding out. Keep your eye out for something like that, because it'd be kind of interesting to see if he ends up pulling something like that out with the amount of injuries that we have as well. Let's do one more question before I hit my prediction. Can the Miami Dolphins block the edge better against the Bills than they did last week against the Jags? Deb Windecker with the question. Like I said, according to the grades, we weren't outright terrible, but we did give up 3 sacks, 2 to Trayvon Walker, 1 to Eric Armstead, I believe. Now, we just talked about Greg Rousseau in the other show. I won't go into too much more detail on him. He had 3 sacks last week. He was an outright menace. And then you got AJ Epinesa on the other side, who's really no slouch either. And you still got Ed Oliver you've got to work with. This Bills defense, what scares me the most of it, I would say right now, is those front guys, the 3 that I just mentioned. With this version of the Miami Dolphins, I think it's 2 things. One, you got Taron Armstead as your best offensive lineman in general. And then you've got Austin Jackson, who's kind of proven over the last year or so that he's probably one of our better offensive linemen. We're not working with studs across the line here. You know that. So we need them to be the top anchors of this offensive line, stop against those edge rushers. And 2, it's Mike McDaniel. It's scheming up the plays. It's game planning and slowing down those edge rushers. We talked about it in yesterday's video. Chipping with Ingold, with the tight ends, doing different motions across the offensive line to just kind of throw off their timing a little bit as well. So yeah, I'm a little bit worried about the front that the Buffalo Bills have. I won't lie about that. But at the end of the day, Mike McDaniel has shown, even when we've gone up against some of the best pass rushers in the NFL, he always seems to have a plan. He's always seemingly got something up his sleeve. All right, Dolphins fans. Here's my prediction. Like I said, let's hear yours in the comments. I got the Dolphins winning a tight one. If I really want to go into depth, I'm going to say the Dolphins have a game-winning drive. We're trailing 24-21 late, and we get a final drive touchdown to cap this one off, and we end up winning by 4. And quite honestly, I hate the term must win, but I really feel like we got to win this game. It gives us an opportunity later in the season when we go to Buffalo to sweep the season series. And at the end of the day, you know what it helps with? It's a divisional game. It's a conference game. It's helping with tiebreakers in the division, in the playoffs in general. But it's everything we've talked about over the last couple of days. It's protecting Tua. It's getting someone on Greg Rousseau. It's James Cook from the Bills. If you look at their one constant on offense from the end of last year into week 1 of this year, they don't have that alpha dog right now at wide receiver that's just going to get peppered with targets the way that Stephon Diggs was. It's James Cook. You got to watch James Cook, whether he's getting the ball from a handoff, whether he's catching the ball out as a pass catcher. 22 touches, I believe it was last week. Look for James Cook to be a guy that they need to keep at bay as well. I think one of the Bills fans in the comments from the last video said something about like Cater Kohu having another nightmare game or whatever, seeing a bunch of Bills players in the end zone. It's going to be different. We're not going to see Cater out on the boundary, and you guys don't have Stephon Diggs anymore. I don't want to talk too much trash. I do think we're going to win this game, obviously, like I said, 28-24, but also, like I said, drop your score predictions in the comments. Let's get as many Miami Dolphins victories as we can in that comment section. Dolphins fans, I will be back following the game. I haven't decided yet if we're going to do the live stream on Thursday late after the game or if it's going to be Friday at some point. But I will keep you posted in the Fins Up Network YouTube community page. So always check there and get subscribed if you haven't done so already. That way, as soon as I create the event so that you know when it's going to happen, you'll get a notification that way as well. We will call it there for today, Miami Dolphins fans. Enjoy Thursday night football. But until next time, Fins up.